Whereas if you think about the land, like if there's a polluted lake or a species that's in decline or a forest that's suffering, you can often see that. There's visual evidence and it's obvious to people on land, and you can kind of pretty quickly see what's driving those. Whereas in the ocean, it's really difficult, and these are very distant relationships to things like climate change tipping points.
Welcome back to the National Oceanography Centre's Into the Blue podcast, where we talk to the people leading the way in raising the profile of the ocean through research, exploration and advocacy. We hope you enjoy today's episode.
Hi everyone. So before we start, it might be good for us to both introduce ourselves. So I'm Dr. Filipa Carvalho. I'm a marine biogeochemist and a biological oceanographer here at NOC, and I'm also a marine autonomy and robotics system chief scientist here at NOC. And I'm mostly interested in sort of understanding the role of biology in climate, and specifically the role of phytoplankton, so the tiny algae, and how that contributes to reducing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. I leverage all sorts of data from my work, but I use extensively marine autonomy platforms such as underwater gliders to try to improve our understanding how the ocean physics affect the biogeochemistry, how that then controls the upper ocean biology, and then how that biology helps export carbon to the ocean interior. And this is what we call the biological carbon pump. And today, I'm joined by Professor Ashley Hall, who I had the pleasure to sail with last summer. Ashley is a professor of design innovation at the Royal College of Arts, or the RCA in London. And we're here to sort of discuss how the RCA and NOC have worked collaboratively in the past and in the future to collect data and then help strengthen our understanding of climate tipping points. So welcome, Ashley. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what does your role involve in the RCA?
Yeah, thank you, Filipa. So, as you mentioned, I'm Professor of Design Innovation in the School of Design at the Royal College of Art, and I look after postgraduate research in the design school, and I also run an MRes in healthcare design with Imperial College. And what we're here today to discuss is the work that I lead for NEMO, which is New Economic Models for the Ocean. And that's a project that is particularly focused around the future of the world's oceans and how we can kind of incorporate design to tackle some of those challenges. So my sort of background's primarily around innovation design, so working with technology and design, lots of working across different types of communities as well, tackling kind of local and national level challenges through using design innovation and design research.
That's really interesting. So many of you, as I probably was a bit before I met Ashley, may be confused why the Royal College of Arts is actually taking part in ocean research. So what is an art school actually doing in the middle of the ocean?
Yeah, thanks, Philip. I think that's a kind of great question to kick off with. And when we kind of talk to people about, working in the oceans, they're often thinking that we might be doing sort of fine art type work, possibly sort of, seascapes or, kind of painting ships or kind of coastal areas. But the RCA, about 70% of the students and the staff are designers, architects and communication designers. So we were set up in 1837 as the Government School of Industrial Design. That was all about helping UK industry. So a lot of the work that we do is actually design work as well. So for us, it's kind of very important to think about all the different challenges, facing us in the future. Particularly, the oceans is one of the most significant ones.
So I mentioned this before. Ashley and I spent a few weeks at sea together in the Labrador Sea this past summer on board the Royal Research Ship James Cook. And we left from Nuuk in Greenland, and then we docked a couple weeks later in Reykjavik in Iceland. And this cruise was part of this REBELS project, which stands for Resolving Biological Carbon Export in the Labrador Sea. And it's an ERC-funded project, which aims to set up this really year-long observatory in the Labrador Sea to try to understand and also quantify the different pathways that carbon can take to reach deeper depths in the ocean interior. So the Labrador Sea is a place with high carbon production, but also has what we call this deep winter mixing, which means these organic carbon particles can still sink like anywhere else in the world, but they can also be pushed down, helping sequester more carbon. Um, and given that the Labrador Sea is not really a super pleasant place in the winter, we went out last year in the summer when we lucked out and the weather was amazing. And we deployed a bunch of instrumentation, so a mooring and two biogeochemical Argos, and they're actually collecting data for us as we speak. Um, and then in a couple of months, we will deploy 4 more gliders to join all these assets, and hopefully we'll come back next August to do a little bit of a process cruise and then recover all the assets. Um, so it was, like I said, it was a pleasure sailing with you and having your perspective. We had really nice chats while we were on board. What was your impression being at sea on the James Cook? Was it kind of what you expected it to be?
I must admit, one of the things I was most impressed with was the amount of skills that the science team and the whole crew on the ship need to have to get the ship to the location, work with all the technologies, process the different weather systems, and also make sure that all the data that you capture is of the highest quality. So I think that was one of the big sort of impressions I took away. Plus the amount of effort that it takes to get a ship to sea as well. There's several years worth of work, making sure that all the right supplies are there, the right people are there, visas, passports, flights, connections, or hotels, all that different type of stuff is a really enormous piece of work. I think maybe unless you've actually experienced that, it's quite hard to understand how much effort and time goes into organising these events. I was very, very, very impressed.
What about the actual experience of being at sea? So the ship life, you end up helping a little bit with the science. You had your own science to do. How is that?
Yeah, I very much enjoyed it, and I think I guess when you're on board ship, there's definitely a ship's routine. So there's kind of certain time today when you have breakfast, when you have lunch, when you have your evening meal, and then there's some social time afterwards when you kind of get to meet more people in the ship, and I guess it does feel like a very, very self-contained living unit. So everything's there. Your whole kind of survival is based on all the things and all the people on that ship working in different, very sophisticated, very skillful combinations as well. And of course, the ship runs 24 hours a day, so it's there all of the time. And I guess in my mind, it's part of the ship looks a bit like a factory. So you've kind of got cranes and you've got sort of big industrial equipment. Then a part of it's in a very sophisticated science lab. Another part of it's almost like kind of like a hotel, where you have very nice cabins, and you're looked after amazingly well with the kind of food and all the kind of other human stuff as well. And there's of course there's a small gym there. And so I think it's a really interesting mix of different types of environment, and you move very quickly through those during the days. So I was kind of quite conscious of this sort of very different types of operations that are happening all within a fairly constrained space, so probably less than 100 meters long. All this stuff is taking place 24 hours a day.
Yeah, with up to 50 people. So
Hmm.
it's fairly confined. But you do get to have a life on the ship, which is quite nice. So while you were on the ship, you were working on the NEMO project. So can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so NEMO stands for New Economic Models for the Ocean. It's probably quite unusual to have a design research project with economic in the title. But the reason for us is that as a school, as an institution, and as researchers, we took a big step back and looked at what we wanted to do in the future. We realised that resilience or flexibility to cope around climate change is one of the big needs going into the future, probably for many, many decades. Design has a role to play there because we design products and systems, services. We even now design policies with government as well. So design can really influence the way that society um, uh, addresses or kind of flexes for some of these challenges. And for us, when we looked at planet Earth, 71% of its oceans, it's a blue planet. So if you go into a spaceship and fly away, you turn and have a look back. Most of the Earth is blue. So, it's something that we often forget when we're on land, that the majority of our planet's actually, visibly, it's water, and it has a huge impact on our food supplies, on our kind of weather, our well-being, and even aesthetic as well. The beauty of the sea is really important to humans. So, we kind of had a look at this, and we realised that there's a limited amount of time, there's a limited amount of design capacity in the world, there's a limited amount of trained designers. We need to build a lot more co-design to tackle some of these problems, and the ocean is extremely important in terms of all these kind of Earth climate systems, and yet it's also quite distant to a lot of people on land. So for us, one of the big things is how we kind of make those tangible connections between life on land and life in the ocean. And I think particularly, some of that is around the objects on the surface of the ocean, and also how we kind of behave. And economics is a really crucial part of it. People need money to survive. We need exchange. There's the behavioural part of that as well, how we behave in terms of the way that we build systems, industries, ways of exchanging information and knowledge. So our work is very much, around that big picture. And then focusing a little bit more where one of the UNESCO Decade Implementing Partners, and one of the really important things that UNESCO has highlighted is this kind of gap between the amazing science that's being created and then actually what people do with it in terms of stakeholders or people in the community. How do you act on it? How do you work with these findings, and how do you maybe change your behaviours in a way that's more sustainable and better for the future of the ocean? So a lot of our effort now is thinking about this kind of co-design work, engaging with coastal communities, and also working with NOC, which is a fantastic opportunity for us to actually get inside the real science that takes place on the seas in very hard to reach places.
Yeah, I thought it was really, really, really interesting how you engaged with the local communities. We had a outreach or engagement event in Nuuk, and I guess historically we tend to work a bit more with at NOC. We tend to work a lot more with the UK community, and we come back to schools and public outreach to kind of communicate our science and get them aware of the ocean and the importance of protecting the oceans and all that. I thought it was really interesting how you did interact with the community at Nuuk, and how much engagement that was. It was about 1% of Nuuk's population visited the James Cook that day. I was thoroughly impressed, and he kind of made me want to do a bit more now that we're going to go back with the local community. So can you talk a little bit more about that interaction and the engagement that you do? I guess you've done in the past as well with previous projects, and that you did a little bit with NEMO.
Yeah, the previous work we did before this voyage is we designed and built an artificial intelligence centre package. We installed it onto a ship in Kangalushack, which is in the kind of middle part of Greenland, and the ship then sailed all the way back through to the UK, and we recorded all the objects on the surface of the ocean. I mean, literally everything that isn't ocean, even sometimes kind of ocean effects or things that were kind of a bit debatable as to whether they were objects or not, like huge hurricanes. And the reason we were doing that is to make this link between things in the ocean and then life on land and communities on land. And so the final part of that voyage, the ship docked in Poole in the UK. So that was 6,000 nautical miles. So we ended up capturing 24,000 nautical miles of footage. And we then kind of processed this information. We created data visualizations, and then we worked with communities and ocean professionals in Poole and in Nuuk in Greenland to kind of show them the objects and find out people's stories, find out their kind of links to kind of climate in the ocean, what were their kind of hopes, what were their fears about the future of the ocean, and use this as a way to try and understand what that landscape looks like. And also to do a bit of exchange, so to show to people in Nuuk the kind of feedback for residents in Poole and vice versa, so we can compare these two really different kind of coastal communities, and yet they're both connected through the ocean, they're connected through climate, they're connected through sea creatures. So there's kind of great connections, and also there's really interesting differences in people's relationships to the ocean and how they respond to it.
Can you elaborate a bit more on that? What sort of differences were more striking between the two communities you engaged with?
One of the things that we noticed, so the way that we worked was we conducted interviews, we did sort of workshops where we print out huge maps. We asked people to draw their kind of fantasy kind of ocean super creature that represented their hopes and their fears about the future of the ocean. So it's visual work as well as kind of that's spoken and written, and then we analysed it for codes, and then we've eventually built up the collections of ideas that were emerging through people's conversations. And one of the things that came out quite strongly was around animals. And so in pool, sea creatures are considered to be very important, but they're quite distant. In the conversation, they were kind of over there somewhere. They're out in the sea. They're sort of at arm's length or even further. Or just certain professions deal with those creatures. So, fishermen, obviously, some people in conservation and other areas. But in Greenland, animals also came up as an equal or very close to equal percentage of people's focus. But it was animals kind of here embedded around. We are part of the same ecosystem, so the distance in how people described animals was very very different, and that was interesting. Kind of seeing how just that one simple part of the ocean can be seen as being very very different. And then other things we found, pollution was a very high focus area in the UK, in pool, particularly around the cleanliness of the sea. Um, in Greenland, that was far less of a concern. And actually, in one of the workshops, we talked to people about sewage, because it had come up in pool in many conversations. But in Nuuk, people said it disappears. It goes into the sea, it vanishes. We don't see it again. So very very different things. Obviously, different size population, different infrastructure, but. That was different. And then ghost gear was also something that was very kind of high up the concern levels in Nuuk, whereas in the UK that tends to be less of a conversation. So there were certainly very different emphases on how people saw their relationships.
I guess that's really important knowledge to use then when you go back and engage again with sort of the same
Mhm.
community. To can you talk about sort of how you then reshape the way you engage with them based on this prior knowledge that you got from the previous engagement? Because I guess you
Yeah,
want to maximize output and the engagement, the outreach side.
yeah. So something that's very important to us, and actually very important to our research principles, is that we keep going back and we disseminate the research with the local community, and they shape it with us. So our mindset is not that we go in as experts. We go in as facilitators. We go in as people who can, help open up conversations, make things tangible, make things visible. But it is very much about giving space for the things that we don't expect to emerge. I think that's really important in research. So, for example, we did this first piece of work on the previous voyage with the Saint Helena ship, and then on the James Cook visit, we brought then that research back, the findings back, and we disseminated it with people in Nuuk. So we explained what we found, and part of that was kind of getting people's feedback again on the results and checking it back and trusting the community that they also have a kind of saying in those results as well. And then the event that you mentioned on the James Cook, we printed out a huge spill house map, and that's a kind of map of the world focusing on the ocean rather than on the land. And we asked people in Nuuk, what do you think is your top ocean strength? And then who do you think might have the answers around the world to your ocean problems? So that's really interesting because we then get people looking at a whole map of the world, thinking about which different parts of the coast or the oceans, northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, different continents, who might have knowledge that we could benefit from, and then what knowledge could we offer that other people could take advantage of as well. And that's important because it connects communities, it connects different types of knowledge as well, and that's really important for that sort of coastal resilience part of the work.
So, what's the future of NEMO? Are you planning another similar type project? Is NEMO getting extended? How? What's the next big
Yeah,
engagement?
so we've initially committed to working to the end of the UN Ocean Decade, which is in 2030. So there's a little bit of time to go yet, and at the moment we're talking to various kind of coastal agencies around the world about different pieces of co-design work that can help improve our relationships to the future of the ocean. So that's about working with communities, leveraging people's lived experience and making sure that people have a say. And obviously, in terms of creativity, that there's, as I mentioned earlier, there aren't enough designers in the world to solve all these problems, and designers just have one point of view. So making sure that you engage communities, you get different points of view, different perspectives, and you also understand problems in different ways. People often describe a problem from a different perspective, or there's different drivers. So having that into the conversation, I think, is really, really helpful.
Yeah, and I think you say right. There's not enough designers, but there are scientists. There's
Yeah.
communicators, and so how can we work better together to tackle these big sort of ocean climate issues, such as tipping points?
Mm. I think one of the most important ways of doing this is what we did on the James Cook, is actually being in each other's spaces. And one of the great insights for me was listening to yourself and your colleagues talking about the different ocean models, the different ocean systems, the difference between ocean physics and ocean biology, the different kind of concepts, different technology that you use and how you use it in different ways. So seeing the science taking place, for real in the middle of the ocean makes a really big difference, and sort of, being part of that and seeing it taking place in real time. I think that's very, very important. I also think there's a lot of synergy between all the different disciplines around how we tackle the future of the oceans, and linking that kind of social part, the kind of data, the visualization, the science, the models, the resilience. That's kind of everyone's work, and I think the important thing there is understanding how we think, how we work, and where we have those kind of common aims and objectives.
I guess the one of the tricky bits is actually getting something like that funded, right? Because we tend to have these little pockets of money to
Mm,
some very dedicated research to answer a big question or a small question. You guys tend to have your own pockets of money, but having this big funding to tackle these big collaborations, that's a lot harder to. Have you? What sort of pots of money would you go for?
yeah, I think it is, and I guess one of the challenges we have in the academic world is our funding is project by project most of the time. So we have individual projects, and we get funded for those. But you also realise that you need to do bigger things in the background as well that aren't necessarily always immediately, obviously fundable right at the beginning. And of course, also one of the other things we know, certainly from a design perspective, the way that we work, is a lot of the stuff that we deal with is very grey and fuzzy. So the problem isn't necessarily clear at the beginning. So we often have to do something in order to understand um, what the problem starts looking like, not only just to ourselves, but to other groups of people as well. And so that's something that we've done a lot with NEMO. And one of the big insights for me actually was on the voyage of the James Cook, is we'd done this huge effort, designing these kind of camera systems, testing them, making sure that they worked, install them onto the James Cook, and they would, photograph once every 3 seconds in international waters, so we could photograph the state of the sea, all the objects there, and get that real tangible kind of quality of data. And then after about a day, I kind of sat back and looked out the window and thought, it's very sunny. It's very kind of calm. That the sea's blue, the sky looks beautiful. In fact, this could be anywhere on Earth, and yet we're sitting on top of a huge climate change tipping point, but you can't see it. And arguably there's no visual evidence at all that we're sat on top of a climate change tipping point. Whereas if you think about the land, like if there's a polluted lake or a species that's in decline, or a forest that's suffering, you can often see that there's visual evidence, and it's obvious to people on land, and you can kind of pretty quickly see what's driving those. Whereas in the ocean, it's really difficult, and these are very distant relationships to things like climate change tipping points. And probably to somebody listening to this, it might sound like when I talk about climate change tipping point, it's like the final scene of a Hollywood movie where you've got this massive vortex and you've got thunder and you've got icebergs clashing and you've got freezing cold,
Yeah.
there's snow and, the clouds are doing all this kind of crazy stuff. But, actually on the days we were there, and obviously in some parts of the year it does look like that, but on the days we were there, it was actually very, very calm. So that's one of the challenges, and with climate change, I think ocean tipping points are some of the most intangible things for people to relate to. So that's one of the reasons why we're really interested in ocean tipping points. Can we find a way to make a relationship between an ocean tipping point and people on land, and what would they do? Like, what would they change? What would you change in your behavior? What would you change your daily routine? Or how would a government respond differently? So I think that if we can make progress there in making tipping points tangible, then I think we can do something really significant. So we can build on that work, and yeah.
I guess one of the key things is that the ocean is a buffer, right? It helps keeps things kind of
Mm,
steady, and this is the problem with tipping points, right? It's steady until it falls,
mm,
because of all the feedback loops that are attached to the different tipping points. But I guess we don't have to focus on just open ocean. If we focus on the ocean to coast interface, then the changes are clearly visible, right? We
mm,
start to see a lot of the melting, and we saw that in Greenland, where Nukus actually doesn't have a lot of snow. So I guess that coastal environment is probably the key bit to show and to use to then communicate to people on land who might feel a bit detached from the whole tipping point
yeah.
story. That, yeah, I mean, the coast is part of the ocean, but it's one bit that is clearly visibly changing. And I feel like
Yeah.
people are getting that with the weather changes as well. The climate is changing. I think it's becoming clearer and clearer.
Yeah, we did a bit of field work in southern Greenland, and we went to a town called Narsak, which is right in the south of Greenland, and we were walking kind of around the settlements, doing some walking research, bumping into people and having a chat as a very early piece of field work, and we met one resident who told us that in the spring the icebergs calved very heavily, more heavily than they normally did, and the wind changed direction, so all the icebergs blew in and blocked the whole port of the town for months on end. So that meant that people couldn't leave, which meant that they couldn't go fishing, couldn't go hunting, couldn't go and see relatives, schooling, healthcare, all those things get really challenged. And so it got to a point where people's food supplies started to run low. And so they started thinking about, how can we do more locally? And of course, the weather now is a bit warmer. So in southern Greenland, there's now polytunnel kind of farming of vegetables and some fruit as well. So climate change is actually conversely brings some benefit. You've got mountain glaciers, you've got rising sea levels. Although in some parts of Greenland, the land's rising faster than even the ocean. So some of the places where people tie their boats up are actually higher above water now than they were before. So there's some quite interesting sort of differences. And then this person, we saw this person say, well, what would you want? If we did a co-design project with you, what would you like to have? And they said, oh, we'd like a biochar reactor. And we kind of thought, okay, it's not something that we would expected to have heard. Why would you want a biochar reactor? And they said, well, if we have a biochar reactor, that gives us a way of holding nutrients in the ground, and that means we can actually grow more vegetables during the year. So the town can become more resilient, can be more. We can also grow these things locally, so they're not shipped in from Denmark, which is the case at the moment. Most of the fruit and vegetables are shipped in, so the quality is not so great. So that was interesting, and that's an immediate sort of coastal challenge, which provokes a great piece of resilient thinking. So that's one of the reasons for us why it's so important to engage with communities, and why it's important to ask different questions to find out how people are planning on tackling some of these challenges.
I guess then another important bit is to communicate the local reactions to the other land
Mm,
population that doesn't experience these issues because they don't live on a town that icebergs can blow in and prevent all sorts of communications with the outside world. So, are there plans to kind of do a mix and match of experiences to sort of broaden the I guess how can I say this, the way people feel directly
Mm.
on their skin the effects of these of climate change in certain locations, to feed that back to other communities that may experience a different, like you had
Mm.
with pool versus nuke. But do you do some exchange as well of the feelings and the knowledge shared by the communities?
Yeah, we did a little piece of work in the Ocean Decade Conference in Barcelona, and that was obviously with people who are very heavily engaged in the future of the oceans. But there we covered several dozen different countries, again with a Spillhouse map, and that was about how you connect different types of knowledge. And for us, I think the first piece of work was pool and nuke. And then, going forwards, looking at climate change tipping points and figuring out a way of trying to make those tangible. And then once that's done, then we can expand that into future areas. Obviously, work with collaborators, work with other agencies, and then see how we can bring that work to a wider group of people. But I think at the same time, a lot of the world's population is moving towards the coasts. So as a species, humans are increasingly coastal, and as the climate warms up, the centres of the continents will become increasingly hotter. So that will force more and more people towards the coasts. So I think there's also a kind of population drive as well. Climate change will push people towards the coasts. So increasingly, that space will become more and more kind of contested. For changes,
Yeah.
volumes of people. So it's an interesting set of challenges going forwards.
So, are there any skills or sort of insights that we can bring from other design areas into working with oceans and coasts that you can sort of think of?
Yeah, I think one of the I guess one of our useful skills as designers is that kind of listening, facilitating, drawing out stories, making things tangible, making things physical, visualizing. Particularly now, I think visualizing can make a big difference. And then the next stage is designing, building, prototyping, testing. Understanding how to scale a particular type of solution so it can be used by a larger number of people. Also, with colleagues, are working on projects linking to citizen science, so that's how we can engage citizens in gathering some of that data as well. So that also changes people's behaviour patterns and changes how people live. And I think also for us as designers is moving into that space where we kind of help bridge that gap between the top down and bottom up. So from designing policies, but also working with local communities as well. I think really stepping back from all of this, we've got 8 billion people on the face of the planet, and we've got maybe 100 years when we need to persuade this 8 billion people that there's a different version of better. And I think a lot of us, have sort of certain goals in our lives, the size of the house, bigger SUV, and even an even more impressive smartphone. It's not necessarily making us happier as a group of people. And I think in the past there were other ways of living and thinking, and there will be in the future as well. So I think the kind of positive part for me of climate change, resilience, and how we deal with it as a society is that we can move towards a better place, and we can have a different idea of what better is. It's more sustainable, but also better for us as well. So and I think our value systems will have to change, and a part of that's behaviour change. Some of that can be designed in partnership with, scientists, designers, engineers, politicians, technologists working together. So I think there's a great opportunity to do something on an even bigger scale, actually.
I think that's definitely the key take home, is that we definitely need to work together, because it's such a big endeavor for just a single area of research that you need multiple players
Mm.
all doing their thing but it's going to be a slow process. But I
Yeah,
think there is change already, so I want to think positively about the human race, and
yeah, yeah.
maybe end this podcast on a positive note. um, I think we can talk forever. It was such a pleasure having you on board, and we had such nice chats over in the Labrador Sea. Is there anything else you wanted to just mention before we wrap up?
I think I'm done actually.
It's
I did
early.
I did want to ask you what your impression was, in the Labrador Sea, or do you think about, well, I'm on a ship, I'm sitting on top of a climate change tipping point. What does that mean? What's your do you kind of think about those kind of things as a kind of scientist? Do you think about the kind of physical impression of those places and spaces?
I do. Obviously, I mean, we set up the project with the tipping points in mind. Going to the Labrador Sea in particular was not by chance. It was on purpose, obviously. So yes, the short answer is we do have that in mind. The one thing that I didn't have in mind as well, in that we're able to do through you, was that engagement with it, getting that perspective from the local communities. I thought that was, maybe I'm just pushing on the same note, but it was really interesting because I guess from my previous background, I've always just done outreach on the national level. And so it was really, really interesting to get that perspective from the local communities. And it sort of highlights what now the research communities or the scientific community is pushing more and more for, using the local knowledge, the
Mm,
indigenous knowledge, to because they do have something to say. They have the
mm,
experience. They might not have the scientific knowledge, but they do have knowledge,
mm,
and how to leverage that, I think, is a key topic that the scientists will need to balance into their own research as well. Yeah, but it was really nice. It was, we picked August, and we waited for the cruise to be in August to maximize the weather window, because we wanted to be successful in deploying the assets for the year-long experiment. But when you look at the statistics of the Labrador Sea, we were an outlier.
mm,
It's usually really, really rough. But we lucked out. We always had a storm behind and ahead of us about a day, as
mm,
you saw, as we were following the weather maps. But we definitely lucked out, and luck is part of the.
mm.
But we
Yeah,
do build our own luck a little bit. But yeah, I really like the cruise. I'm hoping you come back and join us next year as well,
yeah.
and build on the collaboration and the engagement side of things. It was really, really interesting, and very happy to follow up on that.
Okay.
So I'm gonna finish up by thank you so much for taking
Thank you,
part of the
Philippa.
podcast. And like I said, I'm really looking forward to explore more ways in how we can collaborate further.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the podcast. To ensure you don't miss out on future episodes, subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. See you next time.